Politics is playing an increasingly important role in global markets, but for us here in the UK, the focus is very much on Brexit and the 31st of October, when the UK is scheduled to leave the European Union with or without a deal. Much water has to pass under the parliamentary bridge before then. Well, joining us now to assess the possibilities is Alexandra Kellert from Control Risks. Alexandra, welcome back. Back into last week, sterling seemed to be pricing in some sort of deal. Things seem to have unravelled a bit over the weekend. But I guess this is all part of this high-octane brinkmanship that we're now seeing, I suppose, really getting towards the end of October. What do you think is the likely outcome of the current negotiations and where we are? Is a deal possible, do you think?
It is possible, but the deadlines are so tight, especially when we're looking forward to the EU summit, which is coming up at the end of this week. It's now looking very unlikely that there will be a deal before then. And assuming that there isn't a deal, then we get into a situation whereby the Johnson government is really going to be forced to have to look towards getting an extension. OK, now that's through the Benn Act. We'll get on to the Benn Act in just a minute. But before then, even if there is a deal that's hammered out, the European Union, let's say, all of a sudden have a change of heart and they do like what Boris Johnson is proposing or some other tweak is made, we've then got to get it through Parliament. So there's no guarantee that's going to happen with a government in a minority. Exactly. It's still very unclear that there's any space for the government to get a majority on this, even though we're seeing some Labour MPs sort of indicating that they really want to get a deal and might vote for it, just because of the parliamentary arithmetic, because of the kind of complications of so many members of the Conservative Party being put onto the opposition benches. It will be very difficult.
Do you seriously think that there is a chance that some of the Labour parliamentary MPs will break rank and support this? Or do you think, well, it's difficult to see how that happens under a Corbyn government where there seems to be quite a strong hold on what's going on?
It is, in terms of it would be politically very difficult. It would send a signal that Labour were, in a way, sort of propping up the Johnson government. And certainly I don't think we're going to see a mass kind of movement of Labour MPs wanting to vote for this deal. But the numbers I've heard, possibly up to kind of 20 who come from Leave voting constituencies, who really just want to be able to show voters that they do want the UK to leave and that they're prepared to back that. I think depending on what the mood music is, if there's a deal, then that's a potential outcome.
Yeah, much of what's been holding the negotiations up has been the Irish border issue. Deep down, is that a red herring, do you think, on the part of the EU to try and prevent the UK leaving the European Union? Or is there some real concern that this is going to be an insurmountable issue? Ultimately, if we do leave, we'll end up in a hard border in Northern Ireland.
I don't think it's a red herring at all. I think the sort of integrity of the single market is really the key priority for the EU in terms of the Brexit negotiations. And the thought of having a soft border where there aren't full customs checks would be, I think, a serious concern to the European Union.
Let's get back to the Benn Act, because this is the thing that could ultimately push the government into having to sign this document. You hear a lot of commentary around those close to Boris Johnson saying, we will obey the law. Will you sign the letter is a different question, apparently, and they haven't actually admitted to that. Do you see that as something which could yet be a political stumbling block for the opposition, and that the Conservatives find a way around it? Is that what you're hearing, that there is a loophole?
Everything that I'm hearing in terms of the legal side of things is that lawyers believe that there is not really a loophole. Nevertheless, that doesn't necessarily mean that the government won't try to get out of it somehow, and then we would end up with another case probably ending up back before the Supreme Court, and that could certainly make things very messy.
And in the interim, that's going to take time. Of course, we then end up getting it to the 31st of October. The extension, if it's given, do you see the the countries all remaining to go with an extension vote, a vote in favour of the extension?
Yes, everything that I've heard from Brussels has been that even though there are a number of countries that are starting to get quite fed up with the whole process, there is not yet a feeling that it would be a good idea to reject an extension, because it would just make things messier at this stage.
And of course the other side of that is the disruption that the MEPs have threatened to cause within the European Union, the Parliament, I beg your pardon. Is that a real threat, or are they so small in number that it's not really going to make much of a difference?
I think it's a bit of a sort of overstepping the mark if people like Nigel Farage's party think that they can really make a difference. They can make a lot of noise in Parliament, they can sort of slow down proceedings, but I think in terms of actual policy changes and blocking things, they really don't have that kind of power.
Before the last deadline, the first deadline they put in, which was as a result of the members of Parliament voting to trigger Article 50, we had a chat off camera about the potential for violence in the streets. We haven't revisited that since. Is there any change of atmosphere, do you think, amongst those that might be seen to be on the losing side if we don't go out on the 31st of October? Is there a threat you see of violence on the streets, or is that something that we shouldn't really worry about?
I think it's a very limited threat. I think we are likely to see quite large protests, both from pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit supporters. Nevertheless, I think in terms of actual violence, that's quite a limited threat, and it would largely be limited to directed violence at politicians, possibly journalists. But I think the threat of kind of wider spread civil unrest or something like that is unlikely.
Okay, so let's bring it all together and take a look at your base case. So you suggest it's going to be an extension?
Yes.
How long?
Well, what would be said is that the last two times there have been an extension, nobody correctly predicted how long the EU gave that for. So I wouldn't want to say anything too specifically. The Ben Act specifies end of January as the request, so I think that would certainly be a minimum extension if we were looking to have something like elections or a referendum to really change the situation in the UK. The hard deadline that is being talked about now is June next year, because that's when the next budget cycle for the EU starts to come into force. So my guess would be at least January, possibly a bit longer.
Okay, so then we could have both an election and, of course, a referendum. Before that goes in the opposite direction by a similar sort of margin that we had in the first way, if it goes against that, but the split is as equal, it causes a very difficult problem, doesn't it? Because there is no definite outcome. Even if it is the other side, do we have 3 referenda? Do we have another election?
Well, that is what makes it very difficult, and a lot will depend on what the question or questions that are asked are. And so I think if we have a sort of 2-tier referendum where one is remain or leave and one is what kind of leave would you want, then that would potentially give some clarity, but could also just make things even more convoluted. An election certainly wouldn't fundamentally prove it one way or the other, because I can't see a situation where any party wins an outright majority at all.
Yeah, difficult situation. We'll have you back before then, I'm sure. But in the meantime, Alexandra, thanks indeed for joining us. Alexandra Kellert there from Control Risks, as we await the next developments in that path towards the 31st of October.